The blowhole, and I've explained this to a lot of people because it's if you're downtown in any big city or down by Anchorage, down in Anchorage where the higher buildings are, there's always wind. And people that work downtown know that better than most. But when you're walking between the higher buildings, and the wind is always blowing down the street, and it's because of, you know, the structure, and it creates a funnel, and the wind is going to blow faster through a certain area. The blowholes are the same thing. The mountains are just set in a certain way, and with the wind patterns, it's always windy in that spot where it comes through the mountains as it goes through. And when you come out of the Topcock Hills is the last blowhole. So you've got Eagle Island, and then a lot of, well, that's really Eagle Island on the southern route, about 10, 15 miles after Eagle Island coming towards Caltag. There's a blowhole. And then you've got the other one on the other end of the Topcock Hills, which is just out over this way when you're coming down from Nome. And even on the nicest day like we have right here, the wind is always, it funnels and gets streamed through that area. So this blowhole out here is about 15 miles long. So when you come down the Topcock Hills, you wind down, it's beautiful. And you come down, and there's a little shelter cabin there. You go by the shelter cabin, then you come out, and you know that you're on a spot. If you were to look at the map, you can see where from safety, there's land that comes out and sticks out a little bit, and then there's just water. Well, so we go across a section of ice, which I've never gauged it or measured it, but I would think it's probably a mile long, 2 miles long. And then we come out right on the right side of the driftwood line, and that being the high tide mark. And so normally, in my experience in 7 years of running the Iditarod, normally you can see the driftwood line clearly. Not this year. There's so much snow, there's just pieces of wood that are stuck up here and here. Well, when I came out and went into the blowhole, as I came into the blowhole, I came down and there were trail markers, everything was good, but I distracted myself somehow. I'm not sure what I was doing with my sled, but my dogs turned to the left and went to the other side of the driftwood. So if you look at the GPS tracker, I went down close to where the water's edge is, and there's not a lot of sea ice up there, and then came back and went on from there. And you know, that's the I totally forgot what the hell I was going to say.
With the driftwood, and you went
down. Oh, okay. So the beginning of that is you're coming down, and you go across that open part of the sea ice. And this year you can see the tops of the driftwood because of all the snow. And so that's where the blowhole starts. I know from experience of traveling this trail that I've got about 15 miles. On a windy day like we have here in Nome, it's going to be about 20 miles of blowhole. And it's going to increase the amount of snow that's blowing through. You notice how fine the snow is up here up north? And it's almost like an Arabian desert, the way everything drifts. And so when I went into the blowhole, I knew that this is going to be a piece of cake. I have an incredible leader. I have a lot of leaders, but Hooper is incredible. And if I say G, he turns to the right instantly. If I say ha, left instantly. And so I go through and I'll go G, 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 get him on the trail. There you go, there you go. And he'll stay on that pace and run. And then if he drifts over a little bit, ha, 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 he gets on the middle and away you go. So I wasn't concerned about the blowhole at all. But this morning when I was going through the blowhole, I was flying. I must have been going about 10.2, 10.4 miles an hour, which is fast for 900 miles into the race. I'm flying through the blowhole in a blizzard that would close highways in the lower 48 is the best way to as an example, literally. And can't see all your dogs, but I got trust in my dogs, so I'm rocking through it. And for some reason, because I'm always focused on the dogs, I looked over to my left and I could see the reflectors of a dog sled facing the wrong way. So I hit the brakes and I yelled out, "Are you all right?" And heard a voice yell out, "I need help." So I threw my snow down, tipped my sled over, and I ran over, and it was my friend Jim Lanier. And when I got to Jim, he couldn't get his team moving. And he had, like I mentioned earlier, one of the best teams in the race. And so I tried to help to get them moving, couldn't get them moving. They were tangled up, so I untangled them. I straightened them out, and I brought the leaders along because we can get our dogs to chase other teams. If they just kind of, you know, decide we're not going to do it. Well, Jim's dogs had been sitting there with him for a considerable amount of time, and he couldn't get them moving. Well, what the problem was his sled had got hung up on a sharp stump, and the snow was so deep you couldn't see it. So I got the dogs strung out, put them behind mine, they wouldn't go, and then Jim looked under his sled, and I was going to take off so they'd follow me. He said, "Scott, I can't go, there's something stuck under my sled." And I went down there, and honestly, I don't know where it came from, but I grabbed his sled, and now you got 14 dogs in front, and they're tight on the line, and backwards ain't an option. And so I grabbed his sled, and I gave it everything I could, and I was able to pull him off of the stump, get his sled situated to the side, and then away we went. And we took off from there, and then I didn't see Jim. You know, no, that's not what happened. My mind went wandering. So what happened was I pulled him off the stump, and as soon as I pulled him off the stump, his sled was sitting off to the side. So then I went back up because his dogs, the comfort for the dogs is us, the mushers, and the sled. So they'll have a tendency, if they sit for too long and don't have a front tie out on them, they'll turn around and try to come back to the musher. Well, they did that, they got tangled up. So I went back and I untangled everybody and talked to them the way Jim would, which is the way I talk to my grandchildren. Strung the dogs out behind me. I went to take off, and I turned around, and his dogs wouldn't move. So I put my snow hook down, tipped it over, ran back over there. And by then, that's when our eyes started to cloud over with frostbite, and your corneas can freeze. And so at that point, Jim said, you know, I'm not going to make it out of here. He says, you know, you need to keep going if you have to. I said, Jim, I have a satellite phone. Don't worry about it. I'm going to stay here with you. And so I ended up putting my sleeping bag down next to my sled. And now if you imagine it, it was about 60, 70 below wind chill. And I helped Jim over to the sled. He got down. I got down, sat down next to him, put my arms around him, and tried to keep him as warm as I could. In the meantime now, I know that and I'd called Debbie, and I'd called her up and said, because I'm not going to call Iditarod and ask for help. I'm not going to push my SOS button. And so Debbie called up, my wife, and she told them the situation we were in, that we needed help. So then they send out boxes that can take your sled in, and they'll hook the dogs to the brush pile at the front of the snow machine and mush them away. So being the fact that it was Iditarod volunteers that were coming up, I was comforted by the fact that I knew they'd be taken care of correctly. And so, but that was at the end of the story. So Jim is on his sled, and I ran up and I said, Jim, what should we do? Your bags are sitting here on your sled, and so are mine. And Jim said, Scott, you know, I can't get out of here. My dogs won't move. So I'm not going to leave anybody. So I helped him over to my sled, and we sat on the ground, and I wrapped my arms around him, you know, put my leg up over him, and we told stories for, I think it was 5.5 hours. And we told stories, and we laughed. We laughed. And then earlier in the morning, you know, that was just this morning, we're telling stories back and forth, and we're laughing a little bit here and there. And then Jim said, you know, are we going to make it out of here? I'm like, yeah, we're going to make it out of here. Somebody will show up. And a fellow that, I don't think I took the napkin with his name on it, but another fellow had come by, and there's nothing he could do, so he had to continue. And but you know, he was like, you got to get going, you got to get going. But so be it. My dogs need to stay right here because I'm going to stay right here. And so Jim and I sat together for 5.5 hours, telling stories back and forth. I'd called Debbie. The Iditarod was responding, so that we were able to bring, you know, so we were able to bring our dogs back from what happened. And but you know, to be able to help Jim out in that situation is is a lot of people have said some really nice things to me since then, and I don't feel like I deserve it because I only did what anybody should do. And this is something I said to Jim while we were sitting there that made us chuckle. And it's a reflection on our society. I don't know if you know this, but Jim used to be the president or the chairman of the Democratic National Party. Well, one of my dogs, Thunder, went down with Debbie and I to Donald Trump's inauguration. And so we're laying there next to our sled, and I got my arms around him, and I'm keeping him warm. And I said, Jim, the country should be more like us. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, a Democrat and a Republican. Of course, the Republican is helping out the Democrat. And, you know, it was tongue-in-cheek. But it's the truth of what our country should be like, what people should be like. And Jim, I love him. I've always, one of my lines is, when I grow up, I want to be just like Jim Lanier. He is the nicest guy, but the guy's tough as nails. He's tougher than nails, because nails bend. And you know, and his age has nothing to do with it. He was whooping me, and he's 20 years older than me. That's why I came upon him, because he was way ahead of me. If I'd have been ahead of him, I would have never seen him, you know? And so I was able to help him through a tough situation, and at the same time, I started to succumb to hypothermia. And so when they did come, and Jesse Royer is the one that found us on the ice, the race marshal, Mark Nordman, had called safety and said, is anybody there with the snow machine? Jesse and her dad were there. And so Jesse opted to run up after just finishing the Iditarod in great stead. She then jumps up, she drives up there, and she was the first one to get to us. And then a friend of our son-in-law's, who is a Marine, who lives up here, Daniel, came up, and he came up because my son-in-law had called him and said he was worried about me, and so he came up to check on us. So I went with Danny, and then Jim went with Jesse, and they took us back to safety. And the only reason and then Iditarod was coming along to pick up our dogs. And so to leave your dogs out there, you know, people, you know, they look at it like, how could you do that? But you have to think of the situation we're in. If you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of your dogs. And if you don't take care of your dogs, they can't take care of you. And that's what the whole thing came down to. I shortened my rests a little bit so that I'd be able to be here on time. And, you know, maybe it was all just a fate issue. So it was quite an experience.